When you hear that a market index is up or down, do you ever stop to think about what that number actually is? We tend to take it as a fact, right? Like a temperature reading. But what if I told you that number is less like a measurement and more like a carefully constructed recipe? A recipe where the specific ingredients and instructions can completely change the final dish. That's what we're going to dive into.
So let's start with that simple question. A news anchor says, "The market is up today." It sounds so definite, so real. But what market are they talking about? And what does up even mean in that context? Behind that one simple statement, there's a whole series of choices, assumptions, and, yeah, even potential biases. And understanding those choices is the absolute key to figuring out what that number's really telling you.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to follow the recipe, step by step. First, we'll ask what's actually in the number. Then we'll get into how the ingredients are chosen, this whole idea of a population versus a sample. After that, we have to talk about the danger of bias. What happens when the ingredients are spoiled? Then we'll see how the index is actually built, how you get the proportions right. And finally, we'll tie it all together and talk about why this all matters.
Okay, first things first, we have to pull back the curtain on this illusion of objectivity. It's so easy to see a number on a screen and just assume it's pure, raw, objective data. But it's not. It's a construction.
And this right here, this is the most important idea to get your head around. The data we all see is the final product of a long, long line of human choices. It's not a perfect photograph of reality. It's much more like a painting, where the artist gets to decide what to include, what to emphasize, and maybe most importantly, what to leave out of the frame entirely.
So, if the data is a recipe, how do we choose the ingredients? Well, this brings us to a really fundamental concept in statistics that is absolutely critical for understanding market data: the difference between a population and a sample.
Think about it like this. The population is the entire pantry available to a chef. For the stock market, that would be every single stock traded anywhere in the world. It's the total, complete set of all possible data points. It's just massive. You could never cook with all of it at once.
Right, so instead of trying to use the whole pantry, we take a sample. This is just a smaller, more manageable group of ingredients that we believe represents the entire pantry. You've heard of the S&P 500, right? That's a perfect example. It's a sample of 500 large U.S. companies, not the entire population of all U.S. stocks. And you can see how the quality of our final dish depends completely on how well we chose those ingredients.
And there are different ways to do the picking. With random sampling, it's exactly what it sounds like. Every stock has an equal shot of being included. With stratified sampling, it's more deliberate. A chef might say, okay, I need 2 vegetables, 1 protein, and 1 grain to make sure all the key market sectors are represented. And then you have stuff like systematic sampling, which is kind of like picking every 10th stock off an alphabetized list. Every single method has its own pros and cons. Now, what happens if our process for picking ingredients is flawed from the get-go? This is where we get into the real danger of bias. It's like realizing some of your key ingredients are spoiled after you've already started cooking. It can just ruin the entire recipe.
See, sampling bias isn't just a random mistake. It's a systematic error. It's a fundamental flaw in how the sample was chosen that pretty much guarantees it won't represent the whole population. And the result? A number that tells a skewed, distorted story.
And 2 of the biggest offenders in finance are survivorship bias and selection bias. Survivorship bias is a huge one. It happens when we only look at the companies that survived, the winners, and totally forget to include all the ones that failed, went bankrupt, or got delisted. Selection bias is similar. It's when we basically cherry-pick companies for an index because they're already doing great, which, you can imagine, inflates the performance.
This quote just nails the problem, doesn't it? When the companies that fail just vanish from the data, it's like erasing all the mistakes from history. The historical record ends up looking way rosier than it actually was, and that hides the true risks involved. It makes past performance look a whole lot better and safer than it was in reality.
Okay, so we've picked our ingredients, and we've tried our best to avoid the spoiled ones. Now we actually have to combine them. This is the next stage of our recipe, building the index itself, and, crucially, getting the proportions right.
So how much of each ingredient do we add to the mix? Well, that's decided by the index's weighting. In a price-weighted index, a stock's influence is based on its share price. So A stock trading at $500 has way more sway than a stock trading at $20, no matter how big the company actually is. But in a market cap-weighted index, influence is based on the company's total value. Here, the biggest, most valuable companies have the most impact. You can see these are two completely different recipes.
And this table just shows you how crazy the difference can be. So in our little two-stock index, you have tiny tech with a really high stock price, $500, but it's a small company overall. Then you have Gigacorp with a low stock price, but it's twice as valuable. Well, in a price-weighted index, tiny tech just completely dominates, making up 96% of the index's movement. But in a market cap-weighted index, Gigacorp rightly has the bigger influence at 67%. The recipe you choose tells a totally different story.
And of course, these proportions don't just stay the same forever. Companies grow, they shrink, they get bought, so index providers have to rebalance. They have to periodically adjust the recipe to make sure the weightings still reflect the index's goals. It's just essential maintenance to keep the recipe true.
So we've gone through the whole process, right? Choosing the ingredients, checking for bias, mixing them in the right proportions. Now, it's time for the taste test. Why does understanding this secret recipe actually matter to you?
Let's just boil it down to the key takeaways. Number 1, market indices are human creations. They are built, not discovered. Number 2, hidden biases, especially survivorship bias, can give you a misleadingly positive picture because they literally erase failure from history. 3, the weighting method, the recipe, is everything. It decides which companies get to drive the story. And finally, knowing all of this gives you the power to be a much more critical and smarter consumer of financial news.
So I'll just leave you with this question. The next time you hear that simple phrase, "the market is up," you'll know that's not the end of the story. It's the beginning. And you can start to ask the right questions. Which market? Which ingredients were chosen? How is it weighted? Are there any spoiled ingredients in there I should know about? From now on, you can ask about the recipe.